Hello everybody and welcome to Insider's Guide. Today we're discussing the world-renowned Jackson Hole. Jackson Hole is a household name in terms of expert terrain and backcountry access, but it offers so much more than that, which we'll discuss all of in today's episode of Insider's Guide. While Jackson Hole may not have the largest footprint, it has a lot to talk about, so this episode will be split into 3 parts, with this first part discussing the Sweetwater side of the resort. So with that, let's begin an Insider's Guide to Ski Resorts, Jackson Hole. We'll start off with some background information. A lot of it, actually. Jackson Hole actually isn't a huge mountain, at least compared to some of the other giant mountains of the American West, but it still feels like one of the biggest mountains around just simply because there is so much to explore. Jackson Hole, obviously, has tons of good off-piste terrain. I can't tell you where each good tree line and cliff is because every single run and non-run offers something new and exciting to discover. That's a large part of the draw of Jackson. One of the other big draws is that resorts generally lacks backcountry policy. There are backcountry gates all over the resort, and while guides are highly recommended, they are not required. The saying about backcountry at Jackson Hole is, if you don't know, don't go. If you have the proper equipment, knowledge, and partner, there is really good backcountry all around the resort. I would highly recommend taking a guided backcountry tour during your trip to Jackson Hole if you can. It is so unbelievably worth it. But if you've never done backcountry, Jackson Hole without a guide is far from the best place to try it. Looking back over at the inbounds, the resort has a massive vertical drop all served by its infamous tram. Additionally, it has a very good supporting network of modern detachable lifts, and as such, tends to only get bad lift lines at the bridge or gondola, the tram, and sometimes at the Casper and Teewinot chairlifts. Of course, there is always the powder morning lineup and the peak hour out-of-base lines as you'll find at any resort. On the topic of lifts, it is important to note that rather than at an intuitive time like 3:30 or 3:45, the Thunder and Sublette lifts close at 3:40. The Sweetwater, Teewinot, and Après Vu lifts open at 8:30 on weekends and holidays, while everything else opens at 9. The last tram departs at 3:30, and the Moose Creek lift closes at 2:30. The Granite Ridge Real Estate Access Tow closes at 2, but I'm assuming that if you're staying in that development, you are well aware of that already. Jackson Hole is a very steep mountain, as I'm sure many of you already know. It's also a very difficult resort and isn't great for lower level skiers, but it is absolutely an expert's haven. Jackson Hole's geographic location in the Tetons and the local microclimate ensure extensive snowfall each and every season. It is one of the most consistent resorts that I know of in terms of snowfall amounts and quality. A great time to visit Jackson Hole is in mid to late March, as at that time of the year, the snow is still typically really good, but peak crowds have typically already come and gone. Jackson Hole tries to keep runs open until the very bitter end, meaning that if a run is closed, it's for a very good reason. This goes without saying at any resort, but especially at Jackson Hole. Make sure you respect all closed areas. Jackson Hole uses a rating system that features the Double Blue trail rating. This trail rating falls between Single Blue, which is easier, and Single Black, which is harder. Double Blues are either trails that are steep as a black but are groomed, thus not earning the Single Black rating, or ungroomed trails that are as steep as a Single Blue, and thus also not earning the Single Black rating. All of Jackson Hole's greens and Single Blues are groomed. Most of their Double Blues are groomed, but there are a handful that aren't, and I'll be sure to point those out. As far as access goes, Teton Village has some paid parking for $45 on peak days and $35 on non-peak days, along with the cheaper paid parking in the ranch lot, which is a little bit farther out. There are discounted rates for 3 people carpools and free parking for 4 or more people carpools in the ranch lot as well. There is a good bus system that offers a one-way between the town and the resort for just $3. Additionally, there is a large park and ride that has free bus service to the resort, called the Village Road Transit Center. Parking can fill up at both the transit center and at the resort on the busiest days, so my preferred route is to take the bus from town. The nice thing about the bus is it drops you off way closer than it's even possible to park. There is also a skier drop-off lane right next to the bus lane. Now, for some things that stuck out to me. The resort has pretty extensive cell coverage, which is nice for coordinating meetups if skiing with a larger group. There are restrooms at nearly every lift, and while most are Forest Service vault toilets, it's still nice and not something I've seen at many other resorts. It seemed to me that a lot more people put the bar down at Jackson Hole than at other resorts in the Rockies. Marijuana is illegal in Wyoming, and as such there is no lingering smell of weed around the resort. I understand that opinions differ on the issue of cannabis at ski resorts, and while I am not going to share my opinion on the issue, what I'll say is that, mostly having skied in Colorado before, it was certainly a very different experience not smelling it everywhere. Jackson Hole seems to have more named traverses than other Rockies resorts, but thankfully they're all graded pretty well for the most part and have pretty few flat and uphill spots. The South Pass Traverse is one such of these traverses and is probably the most useful of all traverses, as you can hop on or hop off at dozens of different points, and it goes across the entire mountain, passing 6 lifts you can get on. Do beware, especially on South Pass, but on other traverses also, that when you cross a trail, be cognizant of people coming down from above and stay high and uphill the best you can. Now, yes, I am aware that this trail map isn't the greatest quality. I have scoured the internet, even for older trail maps that are of higher quality, and I've come up completely empty. I mean, I even went to page 2 of Google. Who does that? So yeah, this is what we're dealing with today. Of course, understanding that South Pass Traverse starts at Sublette and flows downhill all the way over to Après Vu, it makes sense that the lifts and trails over on the looker's left side of the hill are at a much higher elevation than those on the looker's right side. Thus, the best snow is usually found in the Sublette pod, and the worst typically is in the Après Vu pod. Regardless, as already discussed, snow isn't a concern for a large percentage of Jackson Hole vacations. Crowds have a pretty predictable flow at Jackson Hole, where lots of people go to the looker's right side of the resort in the morning and then migrate to the looker's left in the afternoon. As such, to avoid crowds, I would recommend skiing Sublette and Thunder in the morning and Casper, Teton, and Après Vu in the afternoon. Alright, now, let's pick it up in the base area with the Teewinot lift. The Teewinot lift serves most of the greens in the resort. As such, it is a quite popular lift. If you're trying to ski greens but the Teewinot line is longer than the Sweetwater line, as it often is, you can take Sweetwater and unload at its mid-station instead. The Teewinot lift also offers access to most of the mountain's terrain parks, which we'll discuss in a second. Of the whopping 5 greens at the resort, I find the most fun to be Antelope Flats, as it has a couple of natural rollers that are nice. The other out-of-base lift we'll discuss in this part is Sweetwater. The Sweetwater Gondola is primarily used by ski school to access the Mid-Mountain Learning Center at Solitude Station, but nonetheless, it is a great option for the general public to get on the hill as well. Just next to Sweetwater is the Eagles Rest Quad. Eagles Rest doesn't start in the true base and is rather quite a ways uphill, so walking up to it isn't practical. Instead, to get to Eagles Rest, you'll want to take Sweetwater up to its mid-station and ski down to Eagles Rest from there. Sweetwater tends not to get too crazy of crowds and only gets big lines when Bridger is completely overwhelmed. Eagles Rest never gets lines, but beware that it is a very slow-moving lift. Directly looker's right of the top of Teewinot is the bottom of the Après Vu lift, which is the longest chairlift in the resort with a whopping 5-minute ride. So yeah, Jackson Hole doesn't exactly feature the longest runs around, but of course they make up for that in their difficulty. The Après Vu lift maze is located on the south side of the lift. If you're coming down Teewinot Gully here, keep right where the sign points left onto lower Teewinot. Just trust me on that one. Go opposite the sign where the South Pass Traverse joins up if you want to access Après Vu. On the far looker's right boundary, accessed from the top of Après Vu, is the Saratoga Bowl. The Saratoga Bowl would be a double black at any other resort. I have a feeling I'm going to be saying that a lot throughout this episode. This area is a convoluted mess of trees, open areas, cliffs, and everything in between. In all honesty, you can't really tell which run you're on. Just find a place that looks nice and head down until you reach the traverse. The traverse can get flat at points, so be prepared for that, and even a sidestep here or there, just depending on how it's been carved out that year. The Saratoga Bowl is pretty low elevation, and it is constantly in the sun. As such, I'm not a huge fan of it. You can definitely find bowls with better snow elsewhere. However, it is a nice, playful little area to get away from the dense population of skiers throughout the rest of the resort. Additionally, it's a one-lift lap, which is something that can't be said for a vast majority of the other bowls. St. John's, this double blue, is often groomed on its upper section, but can also feature some big moguls from time to time. Just after the split with Buck Run, which also alternates between grooming and moguls, it is a bit uphill, so enter that section with some speed. The lower section is groomed much less often and has lots of shrubs and grasses often poking up through the snow. I think it ought to be a single black in all honesty. It has a pretty flat traverse to exit. I much preferred Buck Run over Lower St. John's. I'm going to leave Secret Trail mostly a secret, but the one thing I will say is that rather than on the skier's right like it appears on this trail map, it is actually on the skier's left of St. John's. Looker's left of St. John's, under and around the lift, is a wide open area called Teewinot Face. Teewinot Face is a large wide meadow that typically doesn't have big moguls but is rather more bowl-like than anything else. Looker's left of that, you've got a handful of good groomers. This area, from Teewinot to Moran, is in my opinion the second best groomer pod in the resort. The best pod will be discussed in Part B. Just Looker's left of Après Vu is the Teton lift. If any of you have ever seen a lift line at Teton ever, please send a picture or video to my business email, because I honestly just don't believe it's possible. Off of Teton, you can head down Crags, which is probably the steepest single blue in the resort. It is nice, however, because it is north-facing and thus keeps good snow, and it's also not very busy. In this little triangle between Crags and Moran, there is a little open field that is pretty popular for those who aren't quite ready for the bigger, badder bowl areas. It can be accessed via a prominent traverse on the skier's left side of Crags. Also off of Crags, you can take a right into Grizzly Glade, which isn't as much of a glade as just a traditional mogul field, and to be honest, it's some of the easiest moguls you can find. Down lower here, this Solitude Gully is unsigned. To access it, dip skiers right off of Moran onto what appears to be a little unmarked road through the trees and follow that all the way. That's the best way I can describe it. It's a fun, easier, playful little gully. Moran Face and Washaki Glade both flow into it as well, so it does get pretty tracked out. Washaki Glade is not much of a glade as far as I can tell. It's very open, more like a bowl. There are a few trees on the skier's right side, but that area has lots of unmarked cliffs, so you have to be super careful. There are also some trees in the very first 100 yards or so, but from there it's all open. Even on the map, you can see that there are very few trees. Apparently, glade just doesn't have the same meaning in Wyoming. Moran Face is just an extension of the Washaki open area. There are big cliffs to navigate through at the top, the middle is more open, and the bottom has a few trees and some moguls. Over on the skier's left side of the lift is Kemmerer, which is typically a long mogul burner. On occasion it is groomed, but I'd definitely say to count on it being a mogul run. Jackson Hole, rather surprisingly, doesn't have that many good true mogul runs, but this is one among the few. There is a baby straight line chute off of a big rock on the skier's right of Kemmerer, near the top. I call it Mini Corbett's, and I'm sure there's some local nickname for it that I don't know. You can see it from the chairlift to get a sense of where it is. It does require just sending it, but it's really not that long or tall. Looker's left of Kemmerer is wide open, which may very well be the steepest groomer in the resort. However, as its name implies, it is ultra wide. I quite enjoy just cruising wide open. In between wide open and Kemmerer is a run called Moran Woods, which I absolutely adore. You can access it from both sides. It has an easy escape to wide open if you need, and it keeps really soft snow. There are patches of dense trees, open areas, a few small cliffs, and really, it's a much larger area than it appears to be on this map. It all comes together and culminates in a natural gully, which Jackson Hole has a lot of. To be honest, it's a run you have to ski a lot to get to know, but I would highly recommend checking it out. The blue section of Ashley Ridge here is just an extension of wide open and is groomed. Lower Ashley Ridge, however, is not groomed and features pretty consistently bad snow and moguls, rocks, and stumps. The same can be said for Beavertooth, but at least Beavertooth is a fun natural gully. It's far from my favorite natural gully, but I'm not denying that it can be really fun. Down below, you'll see traverses to both the right and left. You'll want to take one of those because the trees become extremely dense after that. There is a really short unmarked natural gully to the skier's left of Ashley Ridge as well that is a good place to expend some energy of little kids. Jackson Face is a relatively open face that commonly features moguls, stumps, and rocks. Sound familiar? It has two access points, one from right at the Casper Maze and one from Nez Perce. It's a pretty secret trail, but only truly good on powder days. Alright, now, let's talk parks. I'm not really a park skier, to be quite frank, so this is as good as you're going to get from me. When I've been, there was a small park on Antelope Flats that featured only jumps. There was a small park on Eagle's Rest that only had boxes and rails. There was a kids park with some kid-centric features between Antelope Flats and Werner. There was a medium park on Lower Teewinot that mostly had features. The largest park was in the Casper Pod between Campground and Easy Does It and had both jumps and features. And there you have it. Well, that about wraps it up for Part A. Go ahead and check out Parts B and C right after this, all about the rest of Jackson Hole. As always, please put any questions down below. Thank you all for watching. All my love, I'm out.